Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc. and Alternative Parties Books Publisher sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard.
Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Friends, today on this podcast, we got another exciting guest like we always have. His name is Greg Polisner, if I pronounce that right. So welcome to the podcast. I'm sorry, George Polisner. Welcome to the podcast, George.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you having me on. For a minute there, I was getting ready to meet this guy, Greg.
No, I know too many Gregs, so no, we don't want to have Greg on here. So George, let us get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Sure. Well, my name is George Polisner, and I am coming to you from just a little bit north of Lisbon here in Portugal. My background for many years, I was in technology on the engineering side, and then later on the business development and project management and project direction side. And I've been was working in technology for a long time, and probably about 20 years ago, I started to really look for ways in which I could apply my experience in technology and socioeconomics for public good. And so I've been working on projects in the technology side that, for example, the California Student Aid Commission and modernizing their systems for the processing of student grants, the expansion of healthcare and the healthcare exchange at the state level. And then most recently, I've been working on an effort called civ.works, which is an effort to strengthen democracy using social networking tools. And so I'm an old guy. I've been doing this for quite a while. And when I basically look at turning a concept into a real entity, a real project, I recognize my own limits in terms of my perspective and insights, and usually recruit a pretty diverse and strong board to make sure that I have input from a lot of different perspectives and experiences when we attempt to move society forward. So I guess that's a little bit about me, Andrew.
Excellent. Sounds great. So kindly tell us, since you've mentioned you're abroad right now and we're conducting this call across the internet seas, how has traveling abroad, specifically the country you're in right now, how has that informed your political outlook?
That's a good question. I think that over the course of the years, I think that it evolves some of my thinking in a nuanced way. I think from my perspective, I really believe in a democratic system, a democracy, a strong democracy. And I think that by looking at other nations and other systems of government, we can gain a perspective in terms of what's working well within the United States system and where we really need to make some progress and some significant changes in order to really create a better system of governance in the U.S.
Sure. So tell us how you define democracy.
So the way that I define democracy, and I know that in the U.S. there are a lot of folks that will weigh in and argue, but the United States is an example of a representative democracy in which ideally the people's interests and needs are and the future that we aspire toward is our interests are properly represented in state, local, as well as national political level to create law, legislation, policy that furthers or progresses the will of the majority. And so a democratic government is a government in which the people, either through direct democracy or representative democracy, as the case in the United States, have a means to establish legislation and policy for themselves, for their families, communities, and society.
Sure. So some people would say with the will of the majority reigning, we would need mechanisms to protect the minority views. How would you integrate that into democracy? How do you view the acceptance of and tolerance of minority positions within the democracy that promotes the will of the majority?
Well, I think what is incumbent upon a society which aspires to truly be democratic is, and this is something that I often say in interviews and in some of my writing, that a real democracy requires a well-educated, well-informed, and civically engaged society. And so I would say in terms of representation of the minority interests, I think that if you have a society in which people are well educated and well informed, you have a society which is going to be tending towards economic policies, tending towards social policies that actually help create a better opportunities and a better potential for quality of life for all people, not just the majority. And so, so I think the better educated a public is, the more that they can make decisions that are inclusive decisions that do respect diverse viewpoints and perspectives, as long as those viewpoints and perspectives aren't creating harm for the rest of society.
Sounds great. So George, kindly tell us how you came to start this social network and what it's all about.
So in the 2016, I was working at Oracle, and towards as we headed toward the election, I'd been fairly political, and at the same time that I was working for Oracle, I was chair of a local county Democratic Central Committee in the state of Oregon, and I think that as we saw the remarkable difference between candidates in 2016, I was taken by surprise when through the Electoral College, Trump was elevated to president. And while I was at Oracle, the co-CEO at the time made a statement that we, meaning Oracle, congratulate the president and are here to support him in any way possible. And because Oracle was a database technology company, and Trump had been talking about the creation of a Muslim database for tracking people, that was just not reconcilable in terms of my own system of morality and ethics. And so I wrote a pointed resignation letter, and I published it on LinkedIn, and it ended up with about close to 400,000 views. It really surprised me, Andrew. Yeah, it was viral, and it ended up being covered by The Guardian and by the New York Times. At the same time, I'd been having discussions with a small group of really smart people, much smarter than I could self-proclaim to be. And we were looking at, aside from the problems in the most recent 2016 election, we were looking at the corrupting influence of money in politics and what we could do in order to strengthen the concept of one person, one vote, especially when you're dealing in a post-Citizens United world with the corrupting influence of massive amounts of dark money pouring into the political space. And so I'd had some experience working with legislation at the Legislative Council for the state of California. And we were familiar with the American Legislative Exchange Council, known as ALEC. And I'm sure you're familiar, and your listeners are familiar with ALEC being kind of a rather unfortunate database of policy which tends to really harm society and favor large corporations. It favors issues like climate denial, promotes issues like right to work, and promotes policy like stand your ground. And so we decided that in terms of working to strengthen democracy, we would create a database that we were calling at the time, we were calling it Smart ALEC. We really wanted it to be kind of the people's version of a database set of legislation and model legislation and law that people could use at a state and local level to pass initiatives. So, for example, if you in your community were very, very concerned with fracking and the impact of fracking on aquifers and the water table in your local community, you might be able to find a model law that would make fracking highly restrictive or even potentially illegal or prohibited in your community. And so we were looking at doing things like that, but what we found is because most people, and rightfully so, are working very, very hard. Some people are working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Asking people to interact with legislation, to pick up legislation, try to get signatures for a ballot initiative, or to show up at town halls and such, was really asking, it was a heavy lift. And we, at the same time, we're looking at some of the behaviors of Facebook and its relationship with Cambridge Analytica and the impact that they had on the 2016 election. And we thought, well, maybe we can start a social network that will not share or sell people's data, and we can build it with the thought of having all of the core functionality you would typically find in a social network. So the ability to post as an individual, here's a picture of my pet doing, a neat trick, or here's a picture of the dinner that I had last night, or here's some pictures from where I'm traveling. But we also wanted to create some serious feeds in the social network that would really be geared toward performing meaningful civic actions. And so we created civ.works, and we created it initially as a nonprofit and started working with a lot of mid-sized to larger organizations to essentially take actions from organizations like, for example, Moms Demand Action, or other organizations, Indivisible, where they may have a local action. We wanted to effectively be able to distribute that action to our subscribers. And so we started out as a response to ALEC, and then we shifted towards something that we felt would be easier. We were looking at Facebook. We were also looking at the popularity of petitions. We still see today. I mean, you can look in your email on any given day and see a petition saying, Mitch McConnell just sneezed, chip in $5 and tell him not to sneeze anymore. And so we were also concerned about the efficacy of petitions, because where they can actually create a lot of visibility for an issue where people may not have an understanding of the issue, like the Keystone Pipeline is an example of an issue that a lot of people may not have heard of until petitions really started to circulate and people became familiar with what we were doing indigenous land and putting waterways and water tables at risk. And so petitions are good from a visibility standpoint, but what we found is when the mass of people want to actually take an effective action, simply this form of clicktivism just isn't necessarily an effective route to driving the kind of change or driving the kind of policy that we need. And so we wanted to move beyond petitions into providing strategic and tactical mechanisms that people could take within their communities, with either going to a local town hall event or going to a candidate debate, and educating and informing their community about issues that they care about in ways that could effectively drive actual change.
Interesting. There's a lot of good stuff in what you said. A lot of things I've been thinking about.
I hope so. We've spent a lot of time on it, and the reality is the discussions that we have with folks like yourself, others in the academic community, people that work on legislative staff, people that work on strategic petitions and other organizations, all help us. When I say us, I mean we're a tiny group of volunteers. We're not, we're not at Twitter headquarters sleeping in one of Elon Musk's beds or anything like that. We're a small ragtag group, but we do hope to change that. I mean, we are working on gathering the resources that we need in order to turn civ.works, first in the United States, into more of a household name. But there is an appetite for strengthening democracy and strengthening collaboration all around the world. As a matter of fact, when we were really just born, when we were just nothing more than a pilot project, we had discussions with the Remain people that were working to counter Brexit in the UK. And so there are opportunities, wherever we see opportunities for people to collaborate and drive collective, positive societal action, that's where we want to be.
Sounds good. So our audience is reformers. So people tend to be familiar with things like Citizens United. In case somebody is listening and they haven't heard of that, would you kindly summarize Citizens United?
So I will try. It's been a little while since I looked at the detail, but in a nutshell, Citizens United, there was a famous lawsuit that was brought against the Federal Elections Commission, Citizens United versus the FEC. And when you think about the term Citizens United, I mean, it sounds like a good thing, right? Oh, great, Citizens United, we're going to do some good work here. The reality was Citizens United was a mechanism in which representing large PAC dark money interests went to the Supreme Court and said, the FEC is imposing rules on campaign contributions about the disclosure of campaign contributions and trying to regulate the dollar amount of campaign contributions. And the people that we represent believe that this limits their free speech ability. This limits speech. And so they petitioned the Supreme Court to take up the case, and the Supreme Court fundamentally ruled, and many people are still very, very rightfully upset about the ruling, essentially elevated the concept of money to speech. And so effectively putting constraints on money flowing into campaign contributions, forcing those contributions to essentially be open and revealed in terms of who's behind them. The Supreme Court said that those are all things that limit free speech, and therefore we're siding with Citizens United to allow these large dark money campaigns to continue. When you think about when you think about the concentration of wealth that's occurred through economic policy in the United States, and you couple that with the ability to drive significant amounts of funds into campaigns, that creates an atmosphere in which it really undermines or subverts the ability of a society to have a true representative democracy. And an example that I can give you is recently in the governor's campaign in Oregon, Phil Knight, who is the retired former CEO of Nike, who has amassed a significant amount of wealth, dropped, at least $1 million, if not more, into that campaign. And Citizens United is a vehicle that allowed him to effectively do that. And so you're talking about a small set of very wealthy individuals that can have a significant impact on local politics, state politics, as well as national politics. I mean, I don't know how many billions of dollars were spent in the runoff campaign for senator in Georgia, but that should be alarming to anyone. I mean, when you think about the fact that hundreds of millions of dollars flow into a campaign in Georgia to affect the outcome of a Senate campaign, and most of that money isn't coming from Georgians. I mean, what kind of representative democracy is that?
Good point. Yeah. Yeah, good point. So you also mentioned how you believe your website can transform activism from a mouse click type activism, as the phrase goes, to a more substantial activism. So that brings the question that we've discussed on our Instagram feed, where how can the internet be effective in activism and how can it not be effective, because we don't want to sign petitions that don't have validity. Some people say petitions on the internet don't make any difference. If they do or they don't, how do we use the internet in a way that does drive change, yet not being, like the phrase, mouse click activism?
Right, or clicktivism. Good question, Andrew. And one preface to a response to that question is it has to be any mechanism, any solution has to be dynamic, because I'll give you an example. There was a great organization. I think it was called Five Actions or Five Calls or something like that, that was circulating around the 2016 campaign. And the idea was an organization would publish, here are 5 calls you can make to legislative staff today to make a difference in some policy decision. And so that sounds like a good thing until you start talking to some of the legislative staff and analysts who basically say, we can't get anything done because we're getting all of these calls on an issue where we're going to vote, we're backing this or supporting it anyways. And so there has to be a dynamic. It started out as a good thing, and then it just started to overwhelm legislative staff and started to subvert its initial efficacy. And so anything that you do as a solution, when you look at driving effective change, you have to be adaptive, and it's a dynamic thing. Secondly, about petitions, I don't think petitions are a horrible thing per se. But if anybody thinks that 500,000 signatures on an electronic petition from California are going to change Mitch McConnell's mind, it's simply not. What's going to change Mitch McConnell's mind is maybe 100,000 constituents in Kentucky showing up when he actually does a town hall in Kentucky, yelling at him about, something that he just did, or, blocking a Supreme Court candidate like Merrick Garland or something like that. So we have to look at, if we're going to use petitions or we use the internet is just a communications tool. And so we have to help people. We have to educate people from a civic engagement perspective, and we have to understand within the local community who the change agents are and how to best equip them to drive change within their communities. Because For example, I grew up in California. I spent time not far from you when I was in Round Rock, Texas. I spent time on the central coast of Oregon. And each place, the political system, the local contacts, legislative staff were all different. And the ways that I could be effective were different. And so you really have to have, really, when you think about it, block captains or people within each of those areas that can help direct or conduct action, progressive action, when you're talking about local or community level politics. And you have to extend beyond petitions. You have to look at and continue to reevaluate and adapt to changes, so that when you are directing thousands of people to take an action, it's action that isn't going to be wasted. And especially because people have time scarcity, people are, working a couple of jobs or more to make ends meet, and you don't want to waste people's time. You want to give them hard and fast things that they can do. And then the other thing that's important to remember is people have different engagement styles. And so there are some people that have no problem hanging out on a street corner with a sign, waving at cars and getting honked at, and whatever. There are other people that feel very uncomfortable doing that. And so you have to understand people have different engagement styles. Some people may feel great about sending a letter to the editor, to the local paper, to help educate, their community and people around them. So people have different work styles, and the idea is to give people mechanisms in which they can drive effective change, but also, work within their own engagement style.
Sounds good. So George, kindly tell us what legal requirements you have to put through to put up a website like this, and social networking website. What is it? Privacy laws? What other laws do you have to grapple with?
Privacy is incredibly important, and then laws related to youth, because there are differences state to state in terms of the kind of content that you can display to an under 18 community. Obviously, we don't want offensive content. We don't want pornography or anything like that on our site. And we have and are continuing to work on mechanisms to guard against that. But really, the privacy law is one of the biggest. I think that there's law and legislation that doesn't necessarily keep up with the evolution of how the internet is used. And so in many respects, efforts like civ.works have to be guided really strongly by ethics and morality and governance from a good board, a good steering committee, and then by the organizations that we work with. And then fundamentally, Andrew, I mean, it's a free market, right? And so if we go off and start filling the internet up with misinformation, direct people in the wrong way, if we say, hey, don't vote next Tuesday, the election, you vote on Sunday or something like that, people will abandon us. And so, a lot of it is making sure that you comply with data privacy issues, making sure that you comply with what you can publish in terms of explicit content, and then you're guarding your reputation, because to me that's one of the most significant barriers. Is you have to develop a really strong positive reputation. We don't want to just be another left-wing group, the left talking to itself. We want to develop a place and continue to encourage ideological discussions across the aisle that can lead to and evolve really good decision making. And I'll give you a quick example. And this is certainly a hot button issue in America, the concept of gun ownership and gun rights and the Second Amendment. And from our perspective, we understand it's a nuanced discussion. If I live, for example, in an apartment in downtown Austin, the police response in downtown Austin, if I have some kind of emergency, is probably going to be fairly fast. But if I
Yes.
live 30 miles away, if I live out in a rural area on a couple acres and I have some sort of security emergency or police emergency, my family's threatened, the police response time is not going to be very fast. And so when a society basically makes rules for all people and expects all people to adhere, when people have different contexts, that's a real problem. And so what we like to do, and where we really want to go with this, is the concept of outcome-based dialogue. And so, for example, if you pose the question, do you think people should be able to own guns? That's a question that will immediately cause an emotional and negative reaction, and people will be very defensive, and the dialogue will just basically go down into the sewer very quickly. But if you ask the question, do you want to feel safe in your home, in your community, and when you travel, then most people that aren't psychopaths are going to say, yes, of course. And so if you start people out with an outcome in which they agree, then you basically have a foundation of agreement, and then can start having a real dialogue about, well, how do we make the person that lives in a rural area where there's a population of 700, how do we make them feel safe, and make the person that lives, in downtown Austin or downtown Boston or Oakland feel safe? And so I think that the problem with U.S. politics and a lot of the discussions today is it starts out with a question that's intended to divide and polarize and engage people emotionally. And we need to have those discussions and conversations that start with an agreement, that start with people coming together, and then let's talk about people's perspectives and context, and think about how we can architect something that works for all people.
Sounds like a plan.
Let's hope. I hope it is. We're anxious to get there. We have a long ways to go.
So how can our audience support your project?
So that's the best way for right now would be to register on the civ.works platform, try it out. We're nowhere near perfect yet. I would still consider us to be a pilot project. We're working right now with a crowdfunding investment to essentially nail some engineering gaps that we know we need to hit in order to really truly be ready for prime time. And so from a timeline perspective, right now we're working on that seed investment. We'll be doing about 3 to 4 months of engineering as we begin 2023. And I expect in late spring, we will have, if all goes well, we'll have the momentum from an investment perspective and from a subscriber perspective to really grow very, very quickly. And so the best way is to support us now, talk about us, volunteer for us, get in contact with us. And, again, we really want to, even though I have my own political thoughts and insights and perspectives, we really do want to have those conversations across the aisle and do real work to improve the quality and dignity and safety of everyone's lives.
Excellent. So it's civ.works, right? That's the website address?
Yeah. Yes. civ.works is the explainer website, and then people can go there and they're able to register for us or even get in contact with me about helping.
Also, you write books, right?
I've written one, and
Okay.
I do some public speaking, but I wrote back in we released, I think, back in 2018. I wrote a book called Orange is the New Orange.
Right.
And what the book is it took the Mueller report, the hundreds of pages, redacted pages of the Mueller report, and distilled them and summarized them in a very easy to follow format. It took the most stunning passages from the Mueller report and put them together. And the foreword for the book was written by a retired federal prosecutor who used to prosecute white collar crimes and fraud cases. And he really wrote a very powerful introduction for the book, but it's called Orange is the New Orange, Our Big Book of Impeachment.
Where's the place you can get the most royalties if people buy it?
Amazon. Sadly,
Okay.
the beast. But yeah, it's at Amazon.com. And certainly that helps us as well. And so thank you for mentioning that, Andrew.
Sure thing. All right, George. So we thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about the exciting things you're doing.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, Andrew.
All right. We wish you all the best with this project and everything else you do.
Very good. Thank you. You as well.
Bye now.
Bye.